Like many who grew up in the MCU, I was first introduced to Luke Cage and Danny Rand through the MCU's Netflix shows. I immediately fell in love with Mike Coulter's acting as Power Man, and I still consider his show as a personal favorite. As for Finn Jones as Iron Fist, I felt mostly bad for the dude, because try as he might, he couldn't salvage what is probably the worst outing of the Defenders' television era, but for very well-known reasons. Back then, amongst comic book online discussion, was when I first learned about how the two characters had formed a team called Heroes for Hire, in which they worked together to do some good old-fashioned heroing while getting paid in the process. I kind of got the why of it, but I never picked up a single issue of any of their comics because I already had the MCU, and I thought that was good enough. Flash forward to now, when I've become more wise to check out the original stories that inspired the movies, and at my local comic book store, I happened to notice the first volume of the epic collection of Power Man and Iron Fist. Years after I reasonably should have, I bought it and finally decided to see why these two were paired up together, and what sort of superhero shenanigans they got up to. Just an FYI before getting into this, I don't want to treat this video like a deep dive into the history of the comics. I just want to talk about what I thought of the book as a whole, and see if I can recommend it to those who want to get into comics. And if, by the end of this video, you feel like you want to check it out, I have a link down in the description to buy the collection yourself. However, I always recommend you go to your local comic book store and buy it there, or just anything else that's there. Comic books are awesome. The first two issues in this book are Power Man number 48 and 49, written by Chris Claremont and art by John Byrne. It's a two-part story wherein Luke gets coerced by Bushmaster to kidnap Misty Knight, but instead runs into Colleen Wing and Danny Rand, the immortal Iron Fist. To be totally honest, I was apprehensive when I saw Claremont's name in the beginning. I jumped into this collection after reading the Dark Phoenix saga, which was also by the same two, and while I enjoyed it a lot, I found Claremont's way of writing a lot of words per page made reading hard. Near the end, it felt like I had spent at least 3 minutes reading a single page, and it was only page 4 out of like 23. While it did at times feel the same when I was reading this story, the introduction to the duo is still a solid piece of classic Bronze Age Marvel, and I don't think you need to be caught up on anything that happened in the Power Man issues preceding number 48, especially if you're coming from the shows. After this was when I guess Marvel decided to give both characters the spotlight in their very own series, but instead of creating an entirely new number 1 for them, they just moved Iron Fist into the currently ongoing Power Man series, renamed it to Power Man and Iron Fist, and didn't bother changing the numbering, so technically the first issue of their duo series is the 50th issue. I imagine if you're hunting for the individual issues, the numbering might make it hard to get into the comics from the beginning, but I digress. While the two had never officially become business partners, issue 54 was the story that pushed them to create the Heroes for Hire office. In it, both Luke and Danny face a shift in their lives, as Power Man works with his lawyer Jared Hogarth to remodel and refocus his own Heroes for Hire services, and Iron Fist reconciles with his upbringing in Kunlun being useless when it comes to the value of money. This is all happening while a villain of the issue, the Incinerator, shows up with a suit that can melt metal and shoot jet streams of fire, and he uses this suit to rob banks. Honestly, that's actually pretty refreshing nowadays. Eventually, the two of them take him down. Danny gives his share of the company to Joy, and the story ends with Hogarth and Cage telling him that he's been brought on as a partner in the new rebranding, finally given the opportunity to earn a true living for himself. And thus, the Heroes for Hire was born. From here on, the story starts to take a more serialized format and becomes more about the two taking on various odd jobs and dealing with the threat of the day. They also occasionally team up with Misty and Colleen Wing, who together run a detective agency called Nightwing Restorations. Surprisingly, there isn't that many team-ups with other big superheroes. Like, the biggest one in the book is with a couple of the X-Men in issues 56 and 57, written by Mary Jo Duffy and art by Trevor Von Eden. After that, there aren't any crossovers with any other Marvel characters, making this purely focused on the two protagonists. I actually think this is a really smart decision, allowing the stories to stand on their own and offer a new perspective in a world with so many other things happening. Another trade-off is that it puts the focus on Luke and Danny's dynamic. Luke is the headstrong, street-smart hero who prefers his old office at the Gem Theater near Times Square over the more lavish office in Park Avenue. He's more comfortable on the streets than any overly fancy setting. Meanwhile, Danny Rand, besides being rich, embodies a more wistful and mythical energy and is more than willing to take a second chance on someone. In fact, issue 59 and 60 deal with Danny and Luke trying to prove Alan Kavanaugh, a former terrorist who indirectly made Misty Knight get a bionic arm, innocent when a string of bombings happen. There's obviously way more arcs in the book than I can fit into a video, but I'll share through the ones I found the most entertaining to me and what I feel best represents the style of the comic. The first is Chaos at the Coliseum, a self-contained story taking place in issue 55, written by Ed Hennigan and art by Lee Elias and Jim Mooney, where the heroes for hire are on guard duty at an auto show that turns to them stopping robbers from stealing the Fantastic car, which is also one of the cars on stage. It was really surreal seeing the Fantastic Four participate in an auto show, and apparently Ben Grimm comes after dark to take the car back. I think this story highlights a different side of Marvel you rarely see in a fun and creative way. The next arc is the 58th issue, El Aguila Has Landed, written by Mary Jo Duffy and Trevor Von Eden this time. In this one, Luke and Danny come face to face with the Eagle, a vigilante and a Zora pastiche, where the main conflict comes from when the two are forced to take the case after the shady company that has them on retainer hires them to stop them. The Eagle. Them being the Eagle, not them, not themselves. That would be bad business. Unlike Chaos at the Coliseum, this arc puts the heroes in a difficult situation, and there's an interesting dynamic where they don't want to stop the Eagle, but they also kind of have to. It sounds like a simple premise, but this story surprised me at times through its complexity and putting the heroes on the back foot, and maybe you'll be surprised too. The last of my 3 favorite arcs is The Bittersweet, Who's Been Sleeping in My Grave, and One Must Die, issues 61 and 62, written by Mary Jo Duffy and art by Kerry Gammill. I don't actually want to reveal the premise of the story or what happens in this one, because I think this is one of the best Power Man and Iron Fist arcs in the book, and I don't think summarizing it will do it justice. It's kinetic, the pacing is perfect, and if you liked Kraven's Last Hunt, I think you'll like a certain moment in this book. So yeah, if you like Luke Cage and Iron Fist, or either, or just Marvel in general, I totally recommend checking this collection out. It's got a ton of material in it, a lot of great art by great artists, and it's the beginning of what was soon to be a decade-spanning friendship in the history of Marvel Comics. It's also just fun to see what inspired the MCU, seeing what changed and what stayed the same, what characters made their transition into live action and who didn't, and what story that hasn't been adapted yet has the most potential to. All in all, I highly suggest buying this book.